The Morristown Green, a central park echoing with the footfalls of Washington and his compatriots during the Revolutionary War, is not merely a serene escape, but a living testament to the town's pivotal role in shaping our nation. Morristown's history seamlessly intertwines with every individual who grew up there, creating a childhood rich in the echoes of the past and a vibrant spirit of community carried forward by each successive generation. These are their stories. This is Beyond the Green.
Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Beyond the Green. We have the pleasure of sitting down today with Edward Stephen France, otherwise known as Ted France. Welcome, Ted.
I'm happy to be here. Thank you very much. I'm honored to be here, actually.
It is our pleasure. So Ted, why don't we start talking about your family and your history here in town?
Well, my family goes way back. As far as I can trace back, my grandfather was here a long time, and he eventually married a woman. They had 10 children. They lived up on Miller Street over here, and they lived also on Harding Terrace. And my father became a firefighter in town. He eventually became the fire chief, and we've had all my siblings. I have 3 siblings. I actually have step-siblings, but primarily it's my family, my 2 sisters and my brother. From Atno Avenue, which is about 8 blocks from here. We are at beautiful Burnham Park.
Right.
Historic. Used to be called Dempsey Roth Field.
Right. So, growing up and your dad being fire chief, how was that for you? Knowing that everybody in town knew your father, did you always feel like you always had eyes on you?
Well, it's a paradox. I knew most of the policemen, so if I was out with some of my friends that, would get in trouble once in a while, they would kind of wink at me and saying, "Are you okay, Ed? Is this all right? Is everything good?" And I would say, yeah. So it was a positive thing, because back then the first responders were very close-knit, which they still are today. But back then, when my dad was the fire chief, when he left in 1982, there was almost 200 volunteer firemen in Morristown. So it was a big community participation. The volunteer fire department was huge. It's changed a little bit because the town has gotten, it's only 2.8 square miles. People have moved out, but the spirit was always there. My dad, he was the fire chief, but he worked 3 jobs. He knew people from that. But my father had a lot of friends. When I ran for office in Morristown, I couldn't believe the amount of people said, "You're Steve's son? You got my vote." Just like I didn't have to say anything else. They knew Steve, my father. They called him Red. He had red hair. The redhead,
Gotcha.
They called him.
Yeah. So did you have any ambition to follow in his footsteps, to be a fireman?
It's a funny thing. Maybe initially I may have thought about it, but to be truthful with you, my brother was really the one that became the fireman, not me. And I liked it. I liked the camaraderie, but for me, I had other interests. I was really interested in baseball and other things,
Right.
Mechanics, academic. There's other things just pulled me away from it. Being a firefighter is more than just hanging out with the guys. You got to be very committed. They have raised the standards now. You got to take firefighter 1, firefighter 2, and I always looked at it as a very serious calling. And to be honest with you, at that time when I was very young, I wasn't crazy about heights too much. I've gotten over that as I've gotten older, but I never adapted to heights, and that always kind of held me back. And I think it maybe stopped some people, but mainly it was the interest. I had other things that really pulled my time, because I respect the time that people and the training they put into these, whether it's ambulance squad or the police department, any of the first responders. There's a lot of training involved now.
Right.
And you can help, like some smaller towns back in the day, they didn't have as much training, but now the training is mandatory, with heart attacks and breathing and things like that.
Yeah. So as we're sitting here at Burnham Park, like you said, and we're here at this field, you've spent a lot of time on this field.
Yes, I have, as many others have.
Yeah. Can you tell us because you've also coached on this field.
Yes.
As you were sitting here looking at it, can you tell us, what are your first thoughts when you sit here and you look at this field?
Well, The people. I think about the people. Back in the '60s, when I was playing ball here, we sponsored a regional tournament here, and there was hundreds of people here. I wouldn't say thousands, but stands were full. We had teams from all over the country, the Northeast actually, Connecticut, place like that. And it was very festive here, and it's just, what I really think about is people like Teddy Denman, who was one of the founders of the Little League, and I was very friendly with him and his son, of course. But he eventually became a politician in town, and just the bringing together all the people like Bob Tracy, all these people that work together, Neat Mayetta, Dolly Verrilli. These are people that built this league up, and I really got to know the adults more than the kids. I mean, I knew the kids, but I was really taken back by the adults, because not only were they competent in what they did, they worked well together. They maybe weren't chummy buddies, but they always respected each other. I never heard anybody insult each other. It was always like smooth. They always were about helping the kids and helping the community, and that's really, it impressed on me very much.
What do you think changed? Why do you think that camaraderie is not there anymore through the last few decades?
That's a good question. I think I don't dwell on that too much, but in reality, things have changed. You can't really volunteer as much because you have to work a full-time job.
Yeah.
And I think that people's interests got pulled away, and you have good people, but I think when you reach out and you try to find better people or the best people, you can find them. I think there became less of recruiting, but I think back in my day when I was growing up, parents and families were having many children. I mean, in my family, we had 4 children. In Morristown, I knew many families that had 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 children.
Yeah.
So it was a matter of course that the fathers, they would get involved, and the mothers too. The mothers would get involved. They would do a lot with their kids. You had the pool over here, just that the community involvement. Plus back then, you didn't have to work so much. The inflation was lower, cost, and there was less people. So the competition was less. But I think that the desire is there, because I've coached here, and I've had people initially didn't want to get involved, and after they get involved, they're so happy that they said, "Boy, I love this. I love the kids. I love working with you guys." And it was always there, even in the later years when I worked here and coached here. It was there. I made a lot of good friends here. I mean, when I come here today, I think of many of the people that have sadly passed on, such as Sam Champy and Tony Catano over there. They devoted that dedicated dugouts to them.
Yeah.
And I worked with both of them. I coached both of them, and they were great coaches. They were, and they came later. They were in the 70s and the 80s and the 90s and beyond. But going back to the 60s, it was historical here, because they used to tell me that this was actually a dump down here at one time. They used to bury stuff in the ground here. Nobody knows that. And they were going to put a football field over here, but they never did it. They were going to do it.
Okay.
They wanted to put lights here for the longest time, but the Burnham Park Association would not allow it. So we're restricted from having tournaments here. They will do temporary. They'll put lights up, but that was a restriction. This is part of Burnham Park, which was donated by Mr. Burnham. So it's restricted, but you can see how it remains to be a baseball field. They don't play soccer here. In fact, even you and I can't even go sit in the dugout today because it's all padlocked in here.
Yeah. So, whether it be as a fan or as the coach, who's the best player you've seen play on this field?
Wow, the best player. Well, there was a pitcher by the name of Raymond Ketch. There's a left-handed pitcher.
He used to be my neighbor.
Yeah, okay. I coached with his dad for a while, Harry.
Harry, yeah.
He played on Don Derrick's team. Raymond Ketch was the best pitcher I ever saw. The best natural player that I saw.
Yeah.
Well, there was 3 actually. There was a kid named Boo Andreas.
Okay.
He moved to town as a 10-year-old. Nobody knew the kid. He came to the tryouts. He hit every single ball they threw. But people said, "Well, he's not from here. We don't know him. We're not going to pick him." But Don Derrick ended up picking him first. And opening day, he was his opening day catcher. And he was the best hitter in the league, just about. But there was another kid, Billy Champy. He was the son of Sam Champy. Sure. He had an older brother, Sam. He was very good, too. But Billy he played at Del Barton. I believe he played in college. This kid, when he was 10 years old, he was hitting home runs. He was never intimidated. He was like everything. He was one of the best players I've seen. And there was a guy, he became a policeman later, Brett Smith. I coached him with his dad. He used to play shortstop. He played a couple of games where he caught almost every ball we hit. And my players, they were in tears. They said, "How does he get all those balls?" He was just a natural fielder, and he was a good ball player. And his brother Shane Smith, Those guys really kind of stand out to me more than anything else. And another guy, Chris Michelle,
Mm-hmm.
he was a kid that I coached. I don't know if you remember that name.
Mm-hmm.
This kid was the most cooperative, easy to coach kid I ever had in my life. He'd run through a brick wall. And the good thing about a kid like that, the other Indians follow the chief on the team.
Absolutely.
He was a pleasure to coach. And he played a little bit. I think he played in college. But those guys stand out.
Yeah, awesome. So let's talk now a little bit more about the evolution of Morristown, from you growing up to what it is today.
Wow.
I remember growing up here as a kid in the 70s and 80s. I still have vivid memories of what Park Place and South Street used to look like, with the Epsteins and the Woolworths and all that. And I'm sure you still have vivid memories of the Bambergers and all that back then. What do you think about how the town has evolved over the last 20, 30 years?
Well, I have lived here a lot. I grew up here. In the 1980s and 90s, I worked in professional baseball for quite a few years, and I did travel around the country. I was in Mexico, Canada, like 25 states. So I was out of town for a while. And each time I would come back, I would notice things that were changing. A lot of the stores dropped off. You'd see empty stores, things like that. But what happened to the town financially, they started borrowing money and not mismanaging money, but they had to buy a new sewer plant. Suddenly the town found themselves $150 million in debt, and investors were afraid to come here. So for a long time, you didn't see much going on here. People were actually used to laugh at Morristown. And I'm a realtor, and now they're not laughing for quite some time now. Morristown was always seen as a place that, it's the county seat, but you wouldn't really want to live there. You wouldn't want to send your kids to school there, because they had other places that they thought, not in a snobby way, thought were better. Randolph or Mendham is better, but are they better? They're really part of this community. But Morristown, being the county seat, they've always had the distinction of having, like Newark, New Jersey. After Newark, New Jersey, in the state of New Jersey, I believe Morristown has the second most tax-exempt properties. So they have all these properties that aren't bringing tax money in. So that added to the problem of the debt.
Right.
So suddenly it started to get turned around when Mike Fabrizio came here with the Morristown Partnership. He got hired by Mayor Block, brought him in the council, and he started really going out and reaching to people like Jimmy Cavagnaro, who just passed away, my good friend. What happened? The guys like Jimmy, he bought the Wedgwood Inn, and he made Society Hill down there, and eventually he made 2 bars in Morristown. And Jimmy always told me, he says, Ed, he goes, 2 things about Morristown. You got great documented history, and you got the location. He goes, someday, this town's going to take off. You're going to see it. You're watching. Our lifetime, it's going to happen. People used to laugh. They said it's not going to happen. But what they've done, they've tried to improve the school. They expanded the school. It's changed a lot. There's a very large immigrant population here now. The mayor made it a sanctuary city, so that enables a lot of people to come here and not have to be followed by, any kind of national, police,
ICE.
things like that, ICE, things like that. So, that's in place, and you have we have a lot of people living here and working here. So it generally works. We have the community theater. There's a lot of things that have changed. But when I grew up here, it was really a small town. The advent of the state putting Route 287 through really changed the town, actually. That was probably when 287 came in and opened. It brought all that truck traffic in. It really, and a lot of people started looking around. Morristown, what's this place? It looks nice here. They got some history, and it started bringing more people in.
Sure.
And of course, the locals didn't like it. The locals that I knew, my father and a lot of his friends in the fight, they went down to Trenton to fight 287 coming through. And Vito Villano, he was a postman, he was also a fireman. He said he went down to Trenton, and he said the state came in. A guy came in with a big cigar, and he says, "You guys here from Morristown? You're not going to stop 287. You're wasting your time. It's going to come right through the center of your town." So 287 was going to actually come right through more to the center.
Really? Wow.
And they were able to get, Frelinghuysen family was able to get it to move a little bit over. And they almost went through the Washington headquarters, which they weren't going to do that because that was a protected property.
Sure.
But a lot of people stood up and they tried to stop it because they wanted to keep Morristown a small town.
Okay.
So as time went on, people have accepted the town, and the people that chose to live here and settle down, they chose to get involved and make it a first-rate town, which is, it's always been very good, but it's always needed a balance.
Yeah.
I don't know. My personal opinion, I think they've done overbuilding in town at this point. But I think, by and large, it's taken a step up as one of the most desirable destinations in the state for many reasons.
Mm-hmm.
Just like Jimmy said, you got the history, you got the location, you got the train, you got everything is right here. You're very close to New York.
Awesome. So, growing up, was there a place that you would always hang out with your friends? Did you have a go-to?
Wow, that's a good question. I had a good friend of mine that I met in 7th grade. He lived up here on Conklin Avenue.
Yeah.
And we used to congregate there, and then he was from Morris Plains, actually, so we used to hitchhike up to Morris Plains all the time.
Yeah.
So I really got to know Morris Plains that time. So we used to go to the drive-in on Route 10, which is no longer
Yeah,
there.
yeah.
We used to hang out all the places like Milton and Henry's Pizzeria up in Morris Plains, Friendly's, which is no longer there.
Sure.
I had a girlfriend lived over by the library in the park there.
Okay.
And we hung out a lot believe it, we used to go to the hospital. We knew candy stripers down there we would date. And
Sure.
the hospital was a little place. You take the elevator, you go up, and it was like one little building.
Yeah.
The hospital, we used to walk around town. We used to go to both the bowling alleys. We used to go to Herman's Bowling Alley. We used to go down to the Morristown alleys,
Yeah.
all those places. We used to go to all the dances. All the churches in town had dances. We'd go to all the dances and
Uh-huh.
see all the local bands and stuff like that. And of course, the park. We'd always hang out in
Sure.
the park a little bit.
Sure.
But just walking. We were always walking, and we were walkers, so we would walk everywhere.
Yeah.
Now you go to Morris Plains, you had to hitchhike everywhere. I had friends in Parsippany. We had hitchhiking. Back then, we used to always hitchhike, which was dangerous, but actually, it was interesting at that time. It was late 60s, early 70s. I would get picked up by a lot of Vietnam veterans coming home from the war.
Okay.
And they would tell me they wouldn't talk much about it, but they would, I could tell they were just back. They bought a brand new muscle car. And,
Yeah.
they were kind of quiet. But I had a lot of friends in the Morris Plains. I had older brothers that had been in Vietnam, and they came
Uh-huh.
home, and they used to tell us about it. And they were afraid for us. They respected it, but they were really worried about what was going to
Uh-huh.
happen if another generation had to go over there.
Yeah.
So we hung out in people's homes. It was very. My friend moved to Jefferson Avenue, which is no longer there. That's gone.
Yeah.
You know where that is?
Yeah.
Back in the
I
hospital.
remember. Yeah.
So we used to hang out there, but mainly just walking everywhere.
Yeah. When we were talking to Bob Gter a couple of months ago,
Oh, Bob, yes.
Bob was telling us that he remembers in the late 60s that they had like pseudo gangs, like the Greasers. Remember, there'd be either where Bamberger's was, or the other half was where Epstein's was, and
Yes.
they'd all hang out. Can you talk a little bit what your perspective on that was?
Well, I was a little bit young, so
Yeah.
I was not eligible to be in those gangs. But I did know many of the members. They had the two primary gangs, if you want to call them gangs.
Yeah.
Was the Raws, the Rah-Rahs. They
Uh-huh.
were guys that wore penny loafers and Levi's and
Yeah.
sweaters and V-neck sweaters, and they dressed preppy. They were like kind of the preppy guys.
Yeah.
But underneath all that preppiness, a lot of these guys were football players and boxers and baseball players, and they were workers. They were like, their parents were like in the community and
Right,
things
right,
like that. Now they had another guy. They weren't greasers. They were called the Gutters.
The
For some
Gutters.
reason, they picked a friend of mine I knew. Paul Corbett was in the Gutters, and one time he explained to me all about it. He explained who was in it and why they were in it, and what they were doing. And the first order of business, if you were a gutter, you had to grease your hair back. They did do that with the Brill cream, whatever. But they all wore leather jackets, and they used to hang out in Bamberger's, and the Rah-Rahs hung out in Epstein's. So there was now these guys didn't confront too much unless there was a dance. You'd be at like Assumption Dance or over at St. Peter's
Uh-huh.
or at the Lutheran Church, and all of a sudden you'd be dancing. All of a sudden, boom, 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 there'd be fighting for about 5 minutes. Some of these guys would go near each other, or they rubbed against them, and they would punch each other. Then, some of the people come in, they'd stop it. It wouldn't end the dance. They would know enough to throw a punch or two, and that was it. But there were confrontations. I used to go into. I had a girlfriend at one time. She lived over in Ledgewood.
Uh-huh.
Her father was on the school board,
Okay.
I don't know if I should mention her name, but anyway, I used to walk home alone from her house. I had to go through Dublin, little Ireland, Madison Street over there.
Yep.
And I would walk through there, and a lot of those guys, they didn't know me. So they were like, "What are you doing here?" and this and that. But I knew a couple of the guys. So I'll leave him alone. He's all right. He knows Joe Carbone, or he knows Corbett, or he knows the Nallys, or he knows Vincent Giro, and leave him alone.
Yeah.
And so they didn't bother me. And I did hang out. There was a store up here called Paul and Peggy's Campus Sweet Shop.
Okay.
If you know where that is, it's now Suvio's.
Yeah.
In there, the Gutters used to hang out in there. Read the comic books, drink Coke, hang out with Paul, and smoke cigarettes, of course, Marlboro. But anyway, they hung out there, and I got to know a lot of them. And they were basically harmless people. It was a facade, like that teenage facade. You're not quite a man yet, so what's my honor? I'm going to be a rah-rah. I'm going to be... But they took it very seriously. When they got into fights, it got a little some of the guys were rather big. A couple were wrestlers. I don't want to say their names, but I see them getting confrontations. There was one problem. One of the guys in the Gutters, he got in a fight with a local cop in Bamberger's. I was there. I was there before it happened, and it was ugly. The guy really went after the cop. And I said, this guy must have his mind. Why would you fight a cop?
Yeah.
So he had quite a bit of a thing with the cop there. And the cop went down, and the ambulance came, and they got arrested. But that was probably the most serious thing that I saw. But they basically didn't bother people. It was like a macho thing, before they had cars and stuff, some guys had cars.
Yeah.
But it was basically, they were like, they were walkers. They were down at the bowling alley, mostly down at the Morristown alley. But, people kind of respected the turf, or they were different. It was interesting, the girls, there would be certain girls that would stay with certain guys.
Yeah.
They would only date the rah-rahs. They would only date the Gutters.
Yeah.
Then a girl would switch once in a while. This one girl went out with one guy. I asked her, I said, why are you... She goes, no, I really like him, and, I don't know if it was a leather jacket or what it was, but, the people, we went to school together, we're all integrated, we had all different races, and we had, these gangs. Somebody referred to them as gangs. But.
Yeah. I think that's the history that not a lot of people know. Not a lot of people, and, Bob and I have discussed this a few times, and one of the reasons why we do this podcast is there's a lot of people, the older generations.
The older generation?
Yeah.
Oh.
The long-time Morristown residents who are passing away now. And with them, the history is slowly dying with them because it's not being shared the way it should be shared. So with you brought some photos with you.
Well, of course, I have Jimmy Cavagnaro, who just passed away.
Yeah.
Now, he didn't live in Morristown, but he did a lot. He was a businessman here for a long time. We talked about him.
Yeah.
This is something that I got from Bob Tracy. Gave me this picture. This picture used to sit up in the American Legion up here when they used to be on Spiegel Avenue.
Okay.
That's no longer there, but this is the ship that my father went down in. There's a story about him, and this is my brother and my father.
Okay.
This is when I ran for office, but this is the ship that went down, and they gave me this when they moved out of there, and I've treasured this picture. You can get it online, but this ship went down in 10 minutes. My father became a disabled veteran as a result of this.
Yeah.
And my father later on became the chief of the Morristown Fire Department. On 2 different occasions, he got the Mayor's Medal for bravery.
Yeah.
The other picture, this is another thing here. Now do you know who that is there?
Bob Tracy?
This is Robert J. Tracy. This guy, he was really Mr. Morristown. I mean, this guy, he's on the level of a John Viola. I mean, he knew everybody, but he was the postmaster in town.
Oh, really? I didn't know that.
A lot of guys jobs. A lot of guys said, that Bob Tracy, he gave me my first job. He helped me out. Bob was the one,
Yeah.
But Bob was, in his later years, he visited Lyons Hospital almost every day. The disabled veterans.
The VA down, yep.
Yeah, the guys who were forgotten, who had no family. He would go down there every day and make sure they got fed, make sure somebody was visiting them, saying hello. And he really impressed on me a lot about the value of the veterans. And I know him for a long time. This is when I ran for office. This is another time I ran for office, take these pictures. But, Bob Tracy, like I said before, Teddy Denman, people like that, these are the ones that really, like when the town would have the annual Fireman's Parade. The Fireman's Parade, we got the St. Patrick's Parade, but the Fireman's Parade back in the day was the biggest parade, not only in the county, but in the state of New Jersey.
Really?
I mean, towns would fight to get into, they would line up here at the Burnham Park, march down Washington Street through the green, but Morristown was the place they wanted to be. We had a big to do at the end at Ledgewood Field.
Mm-hmm.
All the bands wanted to come here. You know, this was like the place. Still is, but back then it was that. The heritage was all these people involved, like, you know, people like Mr. Tracy and, you know, so many of the people that I can name to you.
Yeah. Well,
That's my real estate card. I am a realtor, so.
So would you say that Bob Tracy is your biggest influence?
Oh,
Or one of your biggest influences?
I don't really have one.
Okay.
Oftentimes, I'm a sentimental person. I was at this funeral. I was at this wake, and
Yeah.
I went to the funeral, and I was crying a lot because this man was a good friend of mine. This guy, he was a good businessman in town, but he was a good listener. I learned. I worked in him for 6 years.
Yeah.
I had a contract that I was selling a building on Spiegel Avenue. It was called Willow Hall. He was the developer. And I really got to know him well. I learned a lot from him. I admire a lot about him because the one thing I got from Jimmy was that to be a good listener, even if they didn't agree. A lot of people would yell and screamed at him when he was trying to do the project, but he didn't bark, he didn't insult, he just listened. That's tremendous, listening, the skill of listening.
Yeah.
The other people I mentioned before is Teddy Denman. When I first ran for office, I used to meet with him, and he used to tell me, he was a councilman at one time, and he told me certain things. He used to always say to me, Edward, you got to read that budget. You got to look at what's going on in that budget. You have to ask questions. He goes, I don't have anybody down there asking questions. And I said, oh, I'm going to go ask questions. So I started going to the town meetings. I would ask questions, and you know, people don't like that. They don't want you to, I guess they don't mind you knowing, but they don't want you to know too much. I found that out from him. So it's our government, and I really thought that, you know, guys like him were really about democracy.
Yeah.
I really learned. He was educated. He worked for the county, and people respected him. Oh, one thing about Teddy Denman, I want to mention this. I didn't really know until he passed away, and I read his war record. I mean, he was unbelievable what he did in the war. The medals he got, and he never bragged, never said anything. A lot of these World War II guys didn't, but a lot of the teachers I had at the high school, Mr. Cashman, Mr. Grossbeck, these guys, Mr. Riggy, when these guys passed away, I couldn't believe their World War II record. I was choked up. And they never mentioned it, never talked about it. So it really impresses on me the value and the importance of democracy, you know, speaking your mind, being fair, listening. And my father he was a tough guy, but my father he endured a lot, and people respected my father. So people like that I look up to.
Yeah, that's great. You know, as we said before, you know, it's about preserving the history, telling the stories that, you know, are slowly going away because there's nobody else to tell them. So let's talk about the Facebook page that you created.
Yes, Facebook. Thank you. Well, you know, many people, you know, they put the knock on social media, and it is out of control. There's a lot of bullying that goes on. There's a lot of negativity on the internet. There really is. But the paradox is there is a lot of good on the internet. You know, there's dating sites. There's all kinds of nonprofits on there. There's good things going on there. Facebook, for me, I started out just going on there because I'm a realtor and for my business. It was a networking thing. One day I was walking around Morristown one night, and I just started having recollections of the past, and no matter how much I can't divorce these thoughts from my mind. I'll be in front of Macy's, the old building, I'll be in front of Hamburger Depot, and I'll be in front of the train, and all of a sudden these people come back to me, all these memories. And I started taking pictures, and I threw it online. I said, you know, this is where I met this person, I met this girl here, and we went here for ice cream or something. And people started saying, yeah, that's cool, I remember that, I was there, you know. And then there'd be an event that I would go to a library, and they'd be doing an exhibit on something, particularly like Washington headquarters, George Washington, everything like Fort Nonsense, and they would have an exhibit, and I would take pictures of it, and I would post it, and I would say, what do you think about this? I didn't even know this myself. So there's always like a treasure trove of information that, like our Morristown library, the county library, they're tremendous. They do these exhibits all the time, and they do try to get guest speakers to come in. And I think that there's an window, there's an opportunity for the town to really have like a small, they have like the visitor center on Court Street, but they really need to have like a little posting, like a little office type thing on the green somewhere. You can give, like down in Flemington I saw it recently.
Like a visitor center?
Yeah, like down in Flemington they have it, and somewhere else I saw it, but oh yes, Somerville, they have these things where you walk by. Oh, go to this restaurant. You can park here. A lot of people complain in Morristown to me, there's no parking there. There's plenty of parking there. They've got lots all over the place, but nobody knows where they are.
Right.
Once they know where the lot is, it's a 5-minute walk to their destination, but they don't know that, I got to park right in front. You can't park right in front. This is not Chatham. I mean, this is not, Morristown's a little more spread out. It's not quite LA, but it's, you got to know these things. So my idea would be to have that and be inclusive in the brochure you give out. Put George Washington, put Alexander Hamilton, put some of the sites around town, Fort Nonsense. There's so much. It would take the rest of my life to find out the rest of it. There's so much to deep dive into. And I think that I personally would like to see the town have more of a historical bent to it. And I think mortar and glass is fine. I like the old brick. I was on the town planning board for 3 years back in the Delaney administration.
Okay.
And back then we had historical commission. We had people that would come in, and they would scrutinize the builder. They would say, "Wait a minute, are you serious? You're going to put this here? Do you know what was there before?" And they were like, "Oh, wait a minute. Oh, no, we didn't know." So I think the town really needs to emphasize through the planning and zoning board that, wait a minute, let's also preserve it, because if you don't preserve it, it's going to end up just being a memory and being speculated on. I think for me, people like John Viola, people that know the history, I don't know half of what he knows, but I think we need to preserve it. I think we still can. I think it is being done a little bit.
Right.
But I think that window is open that we can still do it.
Sure. So for you, if you were to be in charge of the welcome wagon.
Welcome wagon.
Yeah,
okay.
And you were to put in a message to any new resident that's moving to Morristown for the first time, and you had a few sentences, and I'm putting you on the spot. In a nutshell, how would you describe Morristown?
I would say very friendly place. I would say be ready for two things, okay? Be ready to smile at people and be ready to start a conversation, okay? Don't be too personal. You don't have to tell a girl she looks like a cheerleader or something. Be like, "Hey, you look very nice. That's a nice dress." Or somebody's dressed nice, say, "Oh, that's a nice pair of shoes." Or, open up. Talk to people. People are so hungry to talk to each other. They don't want you to know too much about them. They don't, people are sheltered, especially since the pandemic. But Morristown, you could go around, you could meet, like for my business, I go around, I talk to people. I'll engage somebody in a little conversation about something, and all of a sudden it blows up to the small world. We know other people, we've been to this other place. And it brings joy to people. People want that. This is why, like a walking town like Morristown, it's meant to sit down and talk, to engage. Be in a hurry, do your stuff, meet your watch and all that. But it's a kind of town that's a meeting and greeting town. It's a place to build memories. And they are building memories as we speak, the people that are here now. But one thing, I have 1,100 people on my site. And 11,000, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to downplay. I have 11,000 followers on there. And I didn't advertise, I didn't give anything away. I didn't say this is the greatest. I didn't have pretty girls on there, or pretty handsome men for girls. It was more just talking about us. A lot of people would say, "Oh, I remember you. I remember. Yeah, what happened to you? Where you been?" Brings the most joy to me is when people connect, because then they reconnect and they generally stay connected, and people need that. And that's really what motivates me to want to stay involved and do that. Is the people aspect. Like when I was coaching Little League here, I met so many people and families that I'm still friendly with, and there was a lot of boys here that didn't have fathers, and I wasn't a father to them, but I did the extra stuff with them. I put a lot of practice in with them. I learned, like, my baseball knowledge. Later I got involved in professional baseball, but I was always a reader. I always learned about baseball. I always tried to help the kids. I would always try to, if I ever had a kid that was discouraged or wanted to quit, I would see kids quit back in my formative years, and they were good athletes, but they just gave up. I would try to push them a little bit in a nice way. And I remember a lot of the kids here that I pushed, though, they didn't like it, but then I still talk to some of these guys. I said, thanks a lot for believing in me, for pushing me a little bit. And I said, I didn't really do anything. I made you put a little more time in. I made you believe in yourself, So it's the confidence. If you can make anybody believe in themselves, that's a gift. People have done it for me, so I think if I can do that a little bit, I'm good to go.
Yeah. And it's one of those things that I'm sure they appreciated in you, that you saw something in them that they didn't see in themselves. And
well, we had a lot of fun. They have an all-star team every year, and everybody doesn't make the all-star team.
Of course, yeah.
But I would see kids that didn't make the All-Star team that in later years they made the high school team. They wanted to play college. I always told kids in their darkest time of discouragement, I said, listen, here's a couple, 1, 2 things you got to work on. So the first thing you got to work on is your mind, your attitude. I don't care what you are. If you have a good attitude, you're willing to listen, and you work hard, you'll make it. And they would scoff at me. But I know that from experience. I grew up with a lot of guys who were rough. You know, as I grew up, when I was 30 years old, I knew almost 100 people that died from drugs, alcohol, motorcycles. I made a list one day, and it was ridiculous. So if I can help some of the young people, or any age people, have confidence that they can start over. You get knocked down, you get back up. You know what I mean? Like today at the funeral, Jimmy's daughter, she was saying that one thing about Jimmy, he was a good listener, and he believed in giving people second chances. And that's a great thing to say. You know, to know that people give second chances. You know, sometimes you make a mistake at work and you're gone out of the door like that. But in sports, you know, you make errors. You make physical errors. But it might be because you have an injury or you're tired. So you need to be patient with the guys or the girls, but you need to be tough too. You have to be the alpha. You have to be. One thing about leading sports, you have to be the alpha. You can't be their friend. You can be friendly, but you have to. If you're ever going to criticize somebody, I learned that you criticize them one-on-one. You don't do it in front of one other soul, because all you're going to do is create anger and resentment. I used to teach. I was an anger management facilitator for Hope House for 3 years. I learned a lot from a teacher there on how to deal with people with anger. And she taught me that one quick thing is the way to alleviate anger in your life is to realize at any given time you can have a different reaction. You don't have to react the way you always reacted. Like I said with Jimmy, he always listened. You learn how to listen better. That correlates to Morristown. It all encompasses this.
Yeah. Well, listen, Ted, we're out of time for this episode, but listen, thank you for much for taking the time. We will definitely have you back on to continue this conversation. But for now, thank you. We appreciate it, and we'll talk to you soon.
Well, listen, thank you for what you're doing, and if I can help you guys in any way, I do have some other people I could recommend to you. And I hope that I was adding a little way something to your system here.
100% you did. And like I said, we really appreciate it.
You know where I'm coming from.
100%.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Ted.
All the best.
To you as well. Thank you.